Have you ever woken up in a daze, stuck between being awake and deep dreaming? Your body is heavy, your head is fuzzy, and you're not entirely sure what's real or not. Your blankets might feel binding, or your pillows might feel like they're not even there as you try to adjust to your groggy state of mind. For me, this feeling was always associated with being a kid and looking at the foot of my bed at like 2 a.m. I'm not sure if I was dreaming or if I was having some sort of exhausted hallucination, but I vividly remember seeing a laughing, floating clown face for just a few seconds, only for it to disappear right after. It took a long time for me to get comfortable sleeping in the dark again. I never knew when the phantom clown was going to come back and just laugh at me again. What was I exactly scared of? Hi, it's me, your sleep paralysis YouTuber Guard. If you saw my Reddit shelf in the opening of the video, no you didn't. That state of mind between being awake and asleep is called the hypnagogic state, and you're probably thinking, since I started off this video with a definition, it's probably gonna be very, very important to the overall story in the video. Well, you're wrong, I just thought it was a really nice word. Thank you for watching. Dual Hearts, ever heard of it? Probably not, and I can't say I would really blame you if you didn't. It's a game that, for a long time, I was half convinced wasn't even real. Like, I own a physical copy of the game, and yet I'd never met anyone that ever played it, let alone even heard of it. So for like 20-something years, it remained in this place in the back of my mind where I had memories of it, but everyone looked at me like I was crazy talking about it. And when I started to do research, I think I understood why it just faded away into obscurity. The game was doomed from the start. When you look at the box art for this game and you kind of look at it really closely, it almost looks fake in a lot of ways. Generic anime character in the front, angry, very serious looking font, black background. If I told you that I made this in like Photoshop in about 30 minutes just to make a point, you'd probably believe me, right? But what's interesting is that there's multiple versions of this box art that look a lot better than this one. All the characters are front and center, and there's a big heart logo behind a way more stylized font. It just looks a lot better to the eye. Hey, wait a minute, that looks really familiar. Dual Hearts is a very strange mixed bag of a game. Even in my memories of it, for years I thought it was an action RPG. And in many ways it is, but more than anything it plays like a Zelda game with an emphasis on platforming. And when I realized that going into this playthrough for the video, I started to question everything I really knew about it. Maybe I had never actually played it, maybe everything I knew about it was a fever dream. When I was a kid, much like the many games I had a strange obsession with, I got this game frequently from Blockbuster rentals. I rented it so often, in fact, that one day my mom surprised me after school with a package that she basically had imported the game from an eBay seller since the game was so obscure already by then. I think I was starting to bankrupt my mom with how much I rented Dual Hearts, unironically. The game stuck with me so much, I remember writing the story out on papers at school, pretending I had made it up. I would attempt to draw the main characters here and there. I would come home and boot it up even if I didn't get far because I just loved exploring and being in that world. I really loved the design of the main character of this game. He's got that unrealistic protagonist vibe about him. You ever see those memes where it's like a lineup of a bunch of anime characters and it's like, guess which one of these is the protagonist? It's kind of like that, but not as terrible. But as I met more people, I got older and grew, no one else had ever heard of it. I would always describe it to friends and get something like an, oh, that's cool type of response, then they just continue the conversation about Madden or something. Joke's on them, while they were playing Call of Duty with each other, I was immersing myself with anime games all night, so who's the real loser now? Oh god, the trauma's coming back. But in my research and kind of looking back at what happened around Dual Hearts' release, I think I found something that really didn't help its case at all. It's not that the game was bad or that it didn't stand out enough to get people's attention. No, there was something much larger that just loomed over Dual Hearts for the rest of its existence and continues to do so to this day. Yeah, okay, that's enough before Disney decides to come in and fucking break my knees. A few days after Dual Hearts was released in the US, a small indie title called Kingdom Hearts was unleashed upon the masses. While technically Dual Hearts came out first in Japan, it was wholly overshadowed in the West. Its blending of the Final Fantasy RPG style with the cartoonish and whimsical worlds of Disney, it was an unholy marriage that persists to this day. And I'm sure none of you are shocked to hear that I fucking love Kingdom Hearts. It's the perfect amount of just absolute nonsense and just fun gameplay that I really love. It's stupid, it's enjoyable, and I could not get enough of it. I would draw the characters so poorly during class, I would talk to my friends about it even though they thought it was really stupid too, and It just stuck with me so long, it still does to this day. And then, much like most of the other stories throughout my childhood, I went to Blockbuster and saw Dual Hearts. Well, clearly it had to be another game in the same series, right? Similar name, and I couldn't differentiate between anime protagonists at the time, so I had to give it a shot. The unfortunate release date after one of the most infamous action RPG franchises out there isn't the only reason that Dual Hearts died, but it most certainly did not help. Similar name, similar heart logo, and anime style, a lot of people I imagine would have been confused in 2002. It certainly confused me at the time, I just assumed that they were part of the same franchise. Many reviews of the game have been lost to time from various publications and websites that no longer exist. And in some of the ones that I can find, they mention Kingdom Hearts directly by name, putting it near the same pedestal as if they're even in the same league. Did Mickey Mouse kill this game in cold blood? Well, as bloodthirsty as that vermin really is, I don't think he was the sole culprit. Dual Hearts struggles with its own identity, but it's fascinating what it ends up creating. It's a game that blends puzzle solving and platforming in interesting ways. It takes inspiration from some of the most notable RPGs with a cast of engaging characters and a story that has so much heart. Every pun intended, please clap. It has worlds and art direction that makes every area you visit memorable and cozy in all the best ways. It's hard to summarize the game in any short or meaningful way. Even giving blanket statements like this, there's so much to really cover. It's a game that tries so much all at once and creates an experience that I really haven't found anywhere else. For years, this game plagued me as some sort of hypnagogic software, existing with nowhere else to confirm its existence. But I wanted to share it, to bring it out of the mouse's shadow and see what it really has to offer. It's a game that Atlus has largely forgotten, having only re-released it once on the PlayStation Digital Store. And I don't think that's fair because there's so much here that deserves to be seen. So sit back, relax, and let's explore your new dreams together. I'm not asking, I'm coming in. You clicked on this video and that was permission. You're getting very sleepy. You want to stroke the YouTube man's ego and hit that subscribe button. Ooh. To really understand what Dual Hearts brings to the table, I think it's important to understand the developer behind it. While the game was published under Atlus, the game was developed by a small group known as Matrix Software. If you've never heard of this group, I wouldn't be shocked since most of the content they've made has been assistance on larger games, ports, and mobile game software. In terms of original works, there's only a handful of games that weren't already existing series or properties by other companies. Founded in 1994 by Kasuke Ohori and his friends in the games industry, the group was built on this idea of serious and interesting content. And only a few years later, in 1997, their first game, Alundra, would end up being released on the PlayStation 1. When I first started doing research on Matrix Software to see, what kind of games they did, I kind of wrote off Alundra as the game they cut their teeth on, but the more I dug deeper into the company, and specifically Alundra again, I realized that there was a lot of things that I couldn't ignore in the research. While the overall gameplay of Dual Hearts is different than Matrix Software's first game, there are a lot of threads here that are too obvious to ignore. While I don't want to talk about the story too much yet, the links between this game and Alundra make me pause. In short, both games focus heavily on the concepts of entering dreams of multiple characters throughout the game and fighting off nightmares and issues that the side characters experience. But even beyond that, more specific details line up far more than I initially expected. The main antagonist of the game posing as a false god to further their goals, the main character ends up in a sleepy, remote village and teams up with a more experienced figure that knows how to handle the dream world. I haven't played Alundra for transparency, so I can't claim to know how deep the rabbit hole goes. But with what I can find online, many consider Dual Hearts to be something of a spiritual successor. And I think it really shows, despite some genuine issues with the gameplay, the amount of love and care put into every inch of the game. I don't really understand why this game is considered to be an action RPG of all things. It's got less RPG elements than Final Fantasy XVI. It plays more like Zelda with a combination of 3D Mario. And yes, I know that is just a word jumble of pointless comparisons that mean nothing, but I do think it helps to sort of contextualize the overall gameplay. You don't have stats or gear, you don't make builds to tackle the enemies ahead in unique ways. Most progression comes from leveling up your weapons through use, but even then that's not something you have much control over. When it comes to aspects like your health, your combat abilities, or anything like that, it's related to the collectibles you find throughout the world. You're not going to steal a magical chainmail thong off a goblin that suddenly gives you +4 agility. Your health doesn't go up based on your character's level or equipment that might improve their vitality. Your health goes up by finding the equivalent of heart pieces. They just call them HP up fragments. Couldn't come up with anything else, huh? All that creativity in the game and you just stop it right here? You can earn an item that gives you a blanketed damage reduction like the tunics in older Zelda games, but it's not something you equip, it just goes in your inventory and then boom, less damage. Now, I'm not suddenly saying, oh, it's actually not ripping off Kingdom Hearts, it's ripping off Zelda, because I think it does enough to carve out its own niche, but I think it's important to establish that considering this game an RPG in any way is a mistake. Like, is it because it's an anime-styled game released by Atlus just a few days after Kingdom Hearts? Is that all it is? You can tell me if it is, reviewers. I know analysis is hard. I won't judge you too hard. Progress like earning new items through the Temple of Dreams is locked behind your collection of dream energy. Think of your typical power stars in Mario 64 or the Jiggies from the Banjo games. While they're not entirely tied to doing specific tasks in each individual level, you can find dozens of them all throughout the different dreams. It's strange how few of them you need overall, only needing around 20 of them to finish the entire game. Meanwhile, after you unlock the main wings of the temple, a big reward gate opens up that requires 100 fucking dream energy. And it's like, lean into that collectible angle if you really want it to be something important. You can get 20 dream energy extremely quickly and it completely disincentivizes you from going back to old dreams. It's moments like this where the game has a lot of different ideas all trying to mesh into one without really committing one way or another. There's tiny bits of collectathon and platforming influence, but also minuscule amounts of RPG with mostly dungeon crawling and puzzle solving being its bread and butter. Platforming and puzzle solving have a much larger focus in Dual Hearts than any other system, and it's not even close. While there is combat, we'll get to that. It exists, and it's the nicest thing I feel like saying for now. But it's not something that takes the center stage like the exploration of levels offered to the player. Like, for the first 20 or 30 minutes of the game, you don't even touch a weapon. Whoa, 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 slow down there, Dual Hearts. That's a bit too much action for this action RPG. The game teaches you how to jump over pits and push blocks and climb and shimmy on ladders and do puzzles before any other skill. And that's because that's more important than finding rats and slimes and just putting them into a blender for experience. Your character does grow, but it's not through the traditional means that you would think of an RPG to do. You'll be pushing blocks into position and jumping over pits for pretty much the entire game. Everything else, every other item you collect or every other utility you discover helps facilitate that basic exploration loop. While the controls aren't always the greatest, with the camera being one of the largest offenders, it never gets too terrible. It technically gives you a full degree of motion around your character, but in an octagon of points around you. It's jarring at first, feeling the camera jitter and lock into place at spots, but you get used to it. Maybe it's just a consequence of me doing this back to back with the big Zelda video, but like, I remember this game being an RPG when I was a kid too, but by the time I finished the tutorial boss, it was like... It's like that Boss Baby meme. Person who has only seen Kingdom Hearts is getting big Kingdom Hearts vibes from this game. There's so little role-playing going on in Dual Hearts, it might as well be a self-insert in a D&D game. But because of that, it allows the game to design levels around the puzzle and platforming challenges. While there are moments that allow the combat to take center stage, it never feels like it fully distracts away from the actual design of the levels. Levels that ask you to navigate through an MC Escher-like dreamscape of paintings and art, a labyrinth of floating platforms and ruins that have traps and timers. Each level has a unique atmosphere that it presents to the player, with no one level resembling another in almost any way. These levels take place in the dreams of other side characters that live on Sano Island, the main location of the game. If you've ever played Psychonauts, you'll probably be happy to see how they ended up designing all these different dream worlds. They could have gone the easier route and made a more generic dream world aesthetic with a few personal, smaller touches per character. Something like the Persona 4 dungeons, where it's clear that they take place in locations that could be reused and personalized, but you know what? They didn't, and I think that's fantastic. Each dream and its challenges are designed specifically after a character's mind. Like, you jump into the mind of a child and it's based off of like her favorite storybook with her as the main princess. Or you find this little dog just snoozing here and you want to jump into his brain to see what he's thinking about. Oh, he just wants to play with you, that's adorable. This little dude's name is Parfait and I love him. Nothing could possibly make this dream horrific in any way. So, quick funny story. When I got to this dream and I saw Parfait's face hovering over me like that, this visceral, primal fear returned like in the center of my chest. Because I remembered getting to this dream as a kid and being terrified of this goddamn dog. Like, I never finished this dream as a kid now that I think back on it, because I never wanted to wake up Parfait and have him bark at me. It scared the ever-loving piss out of me. Hey, I think I'm starting to see a pattern with my fear of transparent floating heads. Dual Hearts is at its best when it allows the gameplay to meld with the storytelling and the world around it. I'm not going to get too deep into the story yet, but just know that if you are a fan of a story that would probably be right at home in some of the most classic JRPGs, you'll probably find plenty to love here. But what I'm trying to say is that the levels aren't simply something for the player to just bounce around in. Each one is so meticulously designed that it's ingrained into the world and deeply personal to the character that it belongs to. Every single dream is connected to a character that you meet in the overworld, and while you don't have access to everyone's dreams immediately, that gives you more time to meet them. For example, this woman here, Shiffin, is introduced extremely early into the story. They make it clear that something is wrong with her, and while your first instinct is to try and help, the game forces you to keep your distance for a little while. But that means, while you're running around and having fun adventures and dreams, you will occasionally run into Shiffin again, allowing more interaction to build up. And that's true for almost every character that you meet. The game introduces you to most of the supporting cast early on in your adventure. A bit too early, they really front-load the presentation of side characters and a lot of their motivations. It's distracting at first, but I think it was necessary considering how important interacting with them becomes. Dual Hearts has a really unique mechanic that I don't see too often in other games like it. There's a day and night cycle on the island, and characters have their own unique schedules depending on what time of day it is and what part of the story you're in. So, like, characters can be doing one thing at one point in the story, and then you have to kind of figure out what they're doing next to progress. You do get an item pretty early on that lets you swap day and night whenever you want, so like, I guess you can just force everyone to age rapidly at the press of an X button. That's the power of Dual Hearts, baby. While I do think that the item sort of trivializes the day and night cycle, I do think it's still great that it was included. It allows you to explore more and kind of see what all the characters are doing. They're not just static NPCs. Your journey continues, but so does their lives in the background. You can learn about Hannah, an adventurous little girl who just wants to play, and Meg, her overworked mother doing her best to handle that girl's energy. You can find the adventures she goes on, even asking you to play with her sometimes the longer you spend on Sano Island. You can learn more about Toma and his daughter as they start to take care of a castaway that washed up on the beach. You can encounter an arena fighter who feels like he's defeated anyone strong enough to oppose him. Sano Island is a living, breathing place that evolves as your story does. Every time you progress through a new dream, something in the world changes, some major and some minor. And I think that was a brilliant decision, allowing the player to experiment and explore throughout the day, see what changes and what characters are up to at various points of your journey. It gives the player and the character more reason to continue and see what comes next. Like, look at this big man you find at the bar. He's got such a fun design. I love characters that have big beards like this. He looks kinda familiar though. I wonder what's bothering him so much if he's just on vacation. You know, I've kind of just been talking about the background systems of the game, and I haven't really talked about the main characters even in the slightest. I've just been making you watch this anime boy run around with a little pig. Does anyone else think he looks like Patamon from Digimon? Just me? Alright. Our pineapple-headed main character here is Rumble. Technically speaking, you can rename him to whatever you want, but the default always starts out as Rumble. Therefore, by the rules of video games, this boy is Rumble, and no amount of silly names will ever change that. Meanwhile, his piggy friend here is Bachstein Friedrich Maximus. Fuck, I'm not gonna be able to do this. Oh, good lord. Meanwhile, his piggy friend here is Bachstein Friedrich Maximus Buffon Visconti Maharaya Medici de Babanera. Fuck me, this name is horrible. But because that's too much of a mouthful, Rumble forcefully renames him to Tumble. Is it a lack of creativity or is it vanity, wanting someone to have a similar name to you? I don't know, I'm just here to make fun jokes over a video game essay. These two are partners out of necessity, neither of the pair able to complete the journey on their own without the help of the other. Rumble, while he is an extremely capable treasure hunter, doesn't have the ability to jump into dreams on his own. And while he's there, even if he is the more physically capable one, he does need help sometimes traversing through the various parts of the dream. Meanwhile, Tumble is just a gigantic fucking goober and can't do a lot on his own. But Rumble is the only one that can use the holy instruments they find, so he offers what assistance he can. In his own way. That assistance generally boils down to letting Rumble ride on his back, breathing extreme halitosis on his enemies, and megaton buns. Yes, that is exactly what it sounds like. Tumble is double cheeked up and he's gonna make it everyone else's problem. Neither character is wholly incapable, but together they sort of combine and make up for the faults of the other. And the game recognizes that because it'll throw challenges at you that require you to know when you need to mix and match and use both characters effectively. Puzzle-heavy segments use Rumble's slower pace and treasure hunting expertise for obstacles that only he and his tools can get through. Not that he doesn't have platforming sections tailored to his skill set, but Rumble's higher jump and hover abilities give him a much higher advantage. Because of that, when the game presents challenges that require precision jumps or traversing the stage, that's Tumble's time to shine. He can dash across sections of dreams very quickly, he can dive underwater and get through watery sections of the game far easier than Rumble can. There's even a Banjo-Kazooie style flight system that, certainly exists in the game and is playable, and that's the best I can say about it, that it was definitely coded into the game Dual Hearts in 2002 for the PlayStation 2. Platforming can be a little touch and go, especially when you're on Tumble's back trying to make the precision jumps. I'm not entirely sure why, but there were times when I was trying to land on smaller platforms where I would just overshoot it despite feeling like I would land fine. But I'm sure after all of that, you're probably thinking our walking pork chop here is the much stronger of the pair. Like, why would you ever want to get off of Tumble's back if he's faster, or he gets through obstacles easier than Rumble? Well, that's where we have to start talking about the items and tools, as well as the combat. Someone call my therapist, I'm having the Dual Hearts nightmares again. The biggest loop of the game is going into dreams throughout Sano Island and collecting keys lost in them. When you find one, usually by beating a boss at the end of a dream, you take it back to the Temple of Dreams in the center of the island and unlock a new door that matches its color. For like 90% of the game, that's Rumble and Tumble's objective, and it creates this cycle of constant character growth. When you open one of the doors to the temple, you're presented with a series of 3 puzzles of... do I say difficulty? There's not a lot in Dual Hearts I would even call difficult, more of a roadblock. Sliding puzzles, throwing boxes, sliding boxes on ice. These puzzles mostly range in using basic item movement and pattern recognition. Until you get this one that's all about vertical maze climbing, and it's so unbelievably frustrating. Why did they do this? At the end of each of these puzzle chambers, you'll get a big glowing jawbreaker that turns into an item in the dream world. And these items come in 2 different categories, generally being weapons or tools. Weapons are pretty self-explanatory, and yes, I am procrastinating talking about combat, sue me. And tools are actually kind of unique in the game. I think the most interesting thing about items in Dual Hearts is that they all have multiple uses. While tools are generally used for puzzle solving and interacting with the dream world, they have extra uses with combat too. The draw card is one of the coolest items in the game, letting you cosplay as Gambit and throw elementally charged cards at enemies. At the same time, if you have a draw card in one hand and a weapon in the other, your weapon will be charged with the same element on the card. What makes the items interesting is that, by the nature of the equipping system, you can mix and match which items you use together. Both hands can equip any item in the game to them, allowing you to choose which items and which weapons you can tackle the problem at hand with. For example, there's this item you get later into the game called the Snake Fang, and it's really reminding me of something, but I can't put my finger on it. There's something about it. Either way, it's used to pull items closer towards you. In the overworld, it's used to pull items or puzzle elements so that you can handle them better, and in combat, it's used to drag enemies closer so you can hit them easier. It's that two-handed system that allows for unique puzzle solving and combat. When you use like the draw card and the arbalest for flaming arrows, yeah, you can do that. Pairing up the Snake Fang with the hammer and dragging an enemy closer, well, it's 4 p.m. somewhere, am I right? Oh shit, it's the hook shot, that's what it reminds me. While the idea of being able to mix and match your abilities for combat and puzzle solving is great, it's something that works in small doses. Unfortunately, most combat never becomes more engaging than simply mashing the attacks with one of your main weapons until the enemy falls over. The only encounters that really require any sort of strategy are bosses, and even then, well, I hope you really like swapping in and out of menus every time you need to swap your tactics. There's this fight with an evil snowman at the end of one of the dreams that's not terrible technically, but it shows some of the issues with the inventory system. To fight him, you drop a mine in front of his feet and disconnect his head from his body. Yes, Rumble gets just explosive mines, they're mystical weapons, don't question it. Then you have to swap to a draw card that's already fire-tuned, as well as a weapon that can hit the little candle wick on the underside of his head. It's a rinse and repeat that doesn't really have any good flow to it. You can bomb him the moment that he reforms, then whack the wick again. And it only gets worse and worse the more complex the enemies get and the more items you have in your inventory. This big flying shell parasite thing, you have to run around and keep changing the draw card's elements to match his orbs, shoot him with the arbalest, and then run really quickly to be able to hit him in his weird face-tongue thing. You don't get a lot of time to attack him either, which makes this whole boss fight take longer, and you have to keep swapping items in and out just so you can keep up with the boss pattern. Many bosses and enemies would have died way faster if I went to grind out my weapon levels. I think that's the only real way you can like grow and impact how much damage you do, and admittedly I neglected that for most of the game. But here's the problem with that. Each level for every individual weapon type requires a set amount of enemy kills. Some enemy types, like bosses, count as multiple enemy kills, but you only really get the chance to refight bosses later. And while enemies do respawn if you run out of range, it's a serious amount of grinding to be able to get to the point where you can do decent damage to any boss after the tutorial. It's not like each level gives you a boost to damage. The first 2 levels only give you new combo strings. Not that they're particularly complex either, just 2 hits and then a 3rd hit with a charge attack. But there's a problem that they don't tell you. You see how it says you can do a 3-hit combo here? Well, what they don't tell you is you need both weapons in both hands to be level 3. So that means, at minimum, you need 2 weapons that have killed 60 enemies each. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot overall, but when enemies spawn at like 2 at a time and you have to keep running back and forth to be able to get them to spawn, it really adds up. Let's just say I ended up sticking with the sword for most of the game. No, it's not just because I like swords a lot. Yes, that was a factor, but this isn't about me, so we're moving on. There is a great reward for fully leveling weapons, one that would probably make bosses and even some of the later, tankier enemies easier to handle. At level 4, that weapon type will deal double damage, and I think that is a decent incentive. Giving a powerful upgrade at the end of a leveling track should exist, but I don't think that Dual Hearts really gives enough opportunity to get to that point. Combat is such a non-focus that the requirements to get to level 4 almost feel unfair, like padding. For example's sake, by the end of the game, even focusing on using the sword when the game didn't require other weapons, I never got a single weapon to level 4. Again, that's my fault. I didn't grind out the extra damage, so some of the later bosses turned into damage sponges. But at the same time, the gap from level 3 to level 4 for every single weapon is 100 kills. That's not 100 kills between all 4 weapons, it's 100 kills with each weapon archetype. The sword, the pike, the hammer, and the arbalest require 100 final blows each. And that's ignoring the 60-something kills between level 1 and level 3. So that means, for a weapon like the hammer that you get extremely late in the game, you have to severely slow down and start grinding out kills for it to be relatively useful. Again, I know 100 kills does not sound like a lot, but when you're running back and forth, trying to kill enemies over and over just for each individual weapon, it becomes so brain-rotting. There are easier ways you can grind near the end of the game if you want to, but it's like, if you want a really unfavorable comparison, you ever play a gacha game where the barrier of entry is really easy, but slowly over time they really start gating off your progress higher and higher? That's kind of like this, but at least with gacha games, you get some really good designs to look at. Like, there's not really anything in Dual Hearts that I really... Hey, so, another quick true story. You know how a lot of people have, like, their first character crushes from media? Like, some people really liked April O'Neil as a kid, other people had Crystal from Star Fox. Me? Val, even though no one knew who the fuck she was, but... 10 out of 10, no, 11 out of 10. Honestly, perfect design. The art direction in Dual Hearts, aside from the story, is one of the strongest parts of the game. While the graphics at times look like a holdover from PS1 development, I can't deny that there's creative decisions oozing out of every inch of this game's world. Don't get it twisted though, I don't think looking like a previous generation holdover is a bad thing. If anything, it helps elevate the character designs to be more appealing. I think Rumble and Tumble's designs are perfect. Rumble doesn't stand out so much that he doesn't fit the rest of the game's style, but just enough that he has that anime protagonist syndrome. Tumble, on the other hand, stands out against the human characters, but that's intentional. He's from a totally different world, but his design is cute enough that I don't mind it. All the other villages of Sano Island have varying degrees of uniqueness too, with none really wasted. If you see an NPC, there's a high likelihood that they'll be important to the story or the game in some way or another. Every character looks like they have their own story, and your journey here is just a footnote to their own lives. And I think that was a perfect way to design all these NPCs, because each character now has a purpose for why they interact with Rumble and Tumble, whether it's being a character that they jump into for a level, or to give them an item, or even just helpful advice on where to go next. Each character also has a really good design that makes them stand out in your mind, so when you want to find them again, you remember what they look like. But who is this child? I've never found another NPC who even acknowledged his existence or even knows what's up with him. I'm convinced his dream is integral to this story, but he won't give up his secrets. What do you know, Phantom Child? I mentioned the designs of the dream worlds briefly, how they vary wildly, but I don't think it can be understated just how powerful they are. Each world is tailor-made to the character that they represent, and they do an amazing job showing their personality. Phoebe, for example, is an entrepreneur from the mainland looking to convert Sano Island to a big amusement park. When you go into her dream, you find this little diorama of the island in a black void and nothing else. She is literally Emperor Kuzco from Emperor's New Groove. Like, she just swats away all the landmarks of Sano Island because they're just resources to her. She's going to put an amusement park there. They're just in her way. A character like Lillian, who spends so much time in the forests worrying about nature, has a dream of a lush landscape that she wants to help preserve. The way the dream personifies various aspects of nature like forests, mountains, or even just the sky are direct representations of how she cares about the world. Okay, so it's mostly just a flat landscape. She's a tree hugger. What did you expect? Music helps reflect each world too, with unique tracks for almost every dream to set the mood. The overall tracks for Sano Island present a calming and carefree atmosphere, helping establish the laid-back nature of the whole journey. Nighttime Sano Island is one of my favorite music tracks in any video game. It's so tranquil and lovely that I could listen to it whenever. The presentation of the world is top-notch, something that the developers really put a lot of time and care into creating. Even if some of the gameplay aspects can be questionable, exploring the world and getting lost in the atmosphere was one of the highlights of the whole game. Am I saying that this game isn't all that fun to play and I just like being in the world? Yeah, kinda, but I think it goes a little bit deeper than that. Dual Hearts is still fun, even if it's extremely simple in a lot of aspects. Combat feels like an obligation, and while the worlds are fun to look at, never really challenge the player. Platforming and exploration are where the gameplay excels, and I never felt like I was frustrated trying to progress through the game. How exactly do you describe a game that isn't the most fun, but I enjoyed getting through it? Barring some story beats, there's little in the game that makes it feel urgent. It's a game that you can take at your own pace, much like Zelda, and spend as long as you'd like in it. There are secret interactions and character moments that you can find depending on when you search around. The game rewards you for your curiosity and diligence for getting connected to these characters, treating them like living people. And I think that there's a reason why the story plays such a massive part of my love for it. That's why, from here out, I do want to give a small spoiler warning for Dual Hearts' story. Yeah, I know, spoiler warning for an almost 20-year-old game, but like, if you're even remotely curious about the game after all I've said, I definitely encourage you to go check it out for your own because it is a unique experience. But seriously, I mean it. The story of Sano Island, of all of its residents, of Rumble and Tumble's friendship, it's all so integral to the heart and soul of Dual Hearts, and it would be a shame to not at least showcase and break down what is so important about it, because I couldn't imagine this game without its story. Dreams are a fickle thing. They tap into our deepest, most personal memories and ideas, manifesting in some of the most vivid experiences. I remember having recurring dreams as a kid of befriending Goku, him showing me how to go Super Saiyan. I still remember the feeling from that dream being weightless, flying through amorphous, abstract clouds. I mean, there wasn't much meaning to it. I was like 8 and I just thought Goku was cool. Nightmares, though, that's where you see the real crazy shit. I remember way more nightmares than half the dreams I've ever experienced. They prey on our darkest fears, our insecurities, anything that sets us off the most. The brain just decides to play a funny little prank and give us a nighttime spook from time to time, you know, as a treat. Alright, listen up, you big pink fleshy computer. I got rid of the appendix, don't think I can't get rid of you. Alright, there's the migraine. Alright, you made your point, you win. I'm sorry, you win. The point is, dreams are extremely powerful. Entire worlds can be formed inside of dreams. People's entire livelihoods have started because of something they saw in a dream. And despite what the title Dual Hearts might make you think, dreaming is an extremely important part of the story, in both the literal and metaphorical sense, because we all have a dream for ourselves, don't we? Almost every character in Dual Hearts has a dream. Most in the literal sense, being the levels that Rumble and Tumble will stumble through in their own time. But more importantly, every character has a dream that motivates their actions throughout the story. And I think it's there where the discussion about Dual Hearts' story should start, because each of those dreams is utterly important to what happens on Sano Island. The whole reason that Rumble finds his way to the island is his occupation as a ruin seeker, an experienced adventurer that finds the most dangerous treasures. And while it's a very basic dream, he wants to find the treasure locked away in the Temple of Dreams, the Dreamstone. Supposedly a treasure impossible to reach, Rumble takes that challenge head on to become the greatest treasure hunter in the world. Of course it gets much deeper than that, but that's his main motivation for most of the story. Just make sure you bookmark the word trauma in the dictionary. We are going to need that a lot later. I think what sets Dual Hearts apart from a lot of other games that it gets compared to, Kingdom Hearts, is the way that it presents its story. While there are overtones of bigger themes and story moments going on in the background, it doesn't show its head very often. For most of the game, it's this almost laid-back treasure hunting adventure where you're running around as this ambiguously anime boy in his weirdly cropped shorts jumping into the dreams of random pedestrians. Oh god, I think Rumble's a sociopath. It's not that those big, world-threatening story moments aren't there, but it's more that they're used to gradually add ticking clock elements. There's a moment where the Queen of Dreams is sort of musing about the coming evil that needs to be stopped, and it's in front of these big, mystical double doors that are supposedly keeping the darkness hidden away. But oh no, all the darkness comes blasting out and taking her over suddenly. They are really not beating those Kingdom Hearts allegations, are they? The game revolves around Tumble's fuck-up at the start of the game. Tasked by the Queen of Dreams, Tumble was supposed to collect all of the holy instruments inside of the temple. But because he's goofy and he's dumb and he's fat, that's not me making fun of him. They love making fat jokes about Tumble and it gets a little uncomfortable, thanks 2000s. He fumbles them as they scatter into the various dreams throughout Sano Island. From there though, this overarching story about some great cataclysm falls to the background, and I think that was the right call for the mood of the game. Dual Hearts lulls you into this facade of being a laid-back treasure hunting adventure with the atmosphere never pressuring you to continue. There's no real ticking clock element for a lot of the game, and it allows you to explore Sano Island at your own pace. Because of that, it gives the player room to experiment and see what each character is going through. When I spoke to Parfait for the first time and Tumble mentioned going into his dream, my face lit up with a stupid little grin. Do I want to jump into the mind of a dog and see what he dreams of nightly? I've never wanted anything more in my entire life. But I've already went over how that exploration ended, so I'll give you a better example. There are a lot of optional dreams that aren't necessary for your critical path through the game, but the game does try to incentivize you to go into all these dreams by giving you HP ups, tummy ups, stuff like that to get you to explore even though they're not mandatory. But the thing is, Dual Hearts does an amazing job at getting you really connected to all these characters' ongoing stories. I mentioned him in passing, but this character right here is Toma. Toma looks like a goofy dude, like a background NPC you'd see in a JRPG whose whole shtick is that he's either fat or stupid, or both if for a jackpot. You see him around your adventure from time to time, working on the ruins with the other excavators, or helping a castaway that washes up on the beach. But would you believe me if I said that Toma is the real reason I even wanted to pick this game back up in the first place? For almost 20 years, Toma's dreams stuck with me whenever I remembered playing this game. I forgot a lot of mechanics or levels, but Toma's dream, that was the one that was clear as can be in my mind. Because I think that dream is the one that really showcases how strong the storytelling can be here. You find Toma at a certain point in the story sitting atop the Temple of Dreams entrance. He seems dejected, sitting with a broken sword and having a hard time talking to Rumble. Up to this point, he's kind of been this jovial, goofy dude who seems nice, so seeing him this way, it makes you want to help. It makes Rumble want to help too. Rumble is his own character, largely closed off and a loner, but all the people of Sano Island slowly start to whittle him down and challenge what it is he values. And Toma's dream is where I think most of the barriers around Rumble really start to crack. The dream starts in this massive tower as we pan down to see two figures running in. One of them is Giga Chad Toma in his younger days, dripping with that same raw sex appeal as Clark from Rayman 2. Same chin too, goddamn. With him is a character that doesn't get too much exposition as to who he is, Marco. My headcanon has always been that he looks a little bit like Rumble, so clearly this was Rumble's father who was happily married to Toma in their younger days. There's nothing that says I'm wrong and you can't prove it either. This is canon and you're just gonna have to live with it. Eventually, a massive knight made of stone drops from the tower ceiling on the pair and turns into a real boy before their very eyes. Toma, like the Chad hero he is, squares up to the knight and says he'll take it on all on his own, only to get immediately fucking demolished, emasculated, and dunked into the water in front of his totally heterosexual life mate. It's almost comical how immediate Toma loses that fight, if you could even call it one. He's just fucking swatted away like a fly. But I mean, surely Marco's gonna start trying to get away, right? He just saw his best friend get thrown around like a rag doll. Maybe he'll run over to like go try and help him, or... Ooh, that did not look good. He's one arm away from being in the Family Guy death pose. That's how you know it's serious. But then things reset as the night drops down from the ceiling onto Toma and Marco again. And it's at that point you realize what's happening. Toma is having a nightmare, reliving the last moment that he and his friend Marco shared together. You realize that Toma is holding that broken sword in the real world and that he's having this nightmare over and over each night. The dream is extremely simple, figuring out how to stop Toma and Marco from getting completely ragdolled like Gmod. Easier said than done, considering the solution is a little obnoxious, but that's neither here nor there. Every time you fail to save them, the dream resets again, forcing you to be stuck in the same self-fulfilling prophecy. Even when you do break it, even when you do beat the boss, something clicks that you might not have realized. You can't save Marco. Save him all you want in this dream. Marco in real life, the Marco that was definitely only roommates with Toma, is gone. And even in the dream, Toma realizes that as the Giga Chad facade melts away, he couldn't save Marco, to the point where angelic dream sheep come down and just really nail that point home. We're left with current day Toma holding the broken sword from the real world. And even though it is a really somber end to the dream, it does give Toma and Marco a chance to say goodbye, even if it's not real. The dream starts to fade around Toma, and Rumble and Tumble start to leave as Toma wakes up. And as a symbol of moving on, Toma offers his broken sword to Rumble. The next time you go into the dream world, you have a new sword variant, the Sword of Friendship. I singled out Toma for a reason because I think his story is the easiest to digest while getting my point across. Is it the most complex writing out there? No. A lot of the storytelling is severely stifled thanks to the text bubbles and no real voice acting. But I think it shows the heart that Dual Hearts is trying to present and commits to telling as good of a story as it can. Florence, the first real dream you enter after the tutorials, is a painter who feels trapped in this shadow of her mentor. Her dream is this twisting loop of artistic expression winding in on itself, ending on a boss fight where Florence and her mentor face off in an art battle. While her mentor is faster and more skilled in the traditional sense, Florence takes her time and uses her own style to express how she sees the world, and by beating her mentor, you help her understand that her art is her own. While her mentor is technically teaching her, the way she creates art is her own process, not his. Later, the amnesiac castaway Gregor's dream is a winding underwater labyrinth. It pairs really well with his story as his memories begin to return and he fears Emma, Toma's daughter, finding out who he really is. A pirate, a notorious one at that, who had been lost at sea after a tragic battle. Lost in the waves of his own mind, coming to terms with the monster he perceives himself to be, his dream culminates with Rumble saving a treasure found deep in the wreckage. When brought back to the real world, the treasure transforms into a photo. Gregor says that he no longer wants to be a pirate, that he doesn't care for fame or riches anymore, and Rumble seems confused. What else is there in the world for someone like him and Gregor but fame and fortune? Gregor tells him that there's more valuable treasures and that he would understand one day. And when he takes a look at the photo, Rumble is stunned for a moment. It's Emma, the girl who helped Gregor and didn't care about who he was. Or the old man here that I mentioned earlier just can't get something out of his mind and he feels like a failure. I think we should go help him out. He's just having such a hard time on his vacation that he deserves a... What the fuck? Why did they give Santa Claus trauma? I know it seems like the game leans into the power of friendship trope because, like, yeah, it does. But at the same time, it's a core theme. The theme of what happens when we face a traumatic experience, how it causes us to close ourselves off, and what it eventually takes to open back up to the world, to find our friends and loved ones who support us. Because that's Rumble's entire journey. It's subtle and it takes the whole game to really come together, but I think it's where the writing is the strongest. Rumble is an arrogant, thick-headed asshole of a protagonist. In my notes, I quite literally wrote down that I hoped that the relationship between him and Tumble got better because it was so abusive for so long at the start of the game, to the point where it just started to get a little uncomfortable, you know? Like, Tumble isn't the greatest character, but he's doing his best. They literally have a mechanic where you punt the shit out of Tumble if he eats something he's not supposed to. Like, he starts choking and you are technically helping him, but I don't know, why did you add that in the first place? I feel like a dick. The further the story progresses, the clearer the intention of Rumble's attitude and mean-spirited nature becomes. He's a loner, not too far off from your typical edgelord original character Donut Steel, but that's largely because he's always been a loner and had the world beat any sort of care towards others out of him. While once he was someone that helped others, he slowly came to rely on only himself. Like I said before, his partnering up with Tumble was solely convenient since they needed each other to complete their goals. For the first bit of the game, Tumble is usually the one urging Rumble to jump into dreams, even ones that don't push the plot forward. Even up until Toma's dream, he's reluctant, just trying to get to the Dreamstone as fast as he can. But slowly over time, with each dream he enters and the more lives he unintentionally touches, that hardened shell starts to break down. Lillian tries to show him how much good he can do if he opens his heart to others with how he helped save the land. Toma tries to make sure he cherishes the people around him before they're gone. Meg and Hannah show him the importance of family, regardless of if it's blood-related or not. Rumble is a selfish character, and going into these dreams always serves his own needs. But even in that selfish desire, he does good for the people of Sano Island, changing many lives for the better. We see a shift in Rumble start to form where he's the one starting to suggest to go into more dreams. Shiffin, I've mentioned a few times now, is not a mandatory dream to finish. She doesn't have a key, but Rumble wants to help her. He wants to give her the confidence to sing again. Beyond even the serious dreams, characters like Penne or Phoebe, like I mentioned earlier, encourage Rumble's sillier, childlike side that he never had the time to nurture. He enjoys playing the games in Phoebe's dreams. He enjoys the competition and races with Penne. Even his rival Val, whose dream is the first and last levels of the games, shows the way Rumble has changed. Thinking he could only rely on himself, he had forgotten how he had once helped a younger Val save a locket that belonged to her family. And at the end of the day, we find out, and the whole reason she became Rumble's rival was to stay close to him, to be able to keep an eye on him and make sure he'll be safe throughout all of his adventures. God, I wish that were me. When I found this little, I guess you could call it, shrine to Rumble in her dream, it really hit me. That a small detail like this that doesn't really get a direct call out is just here. To know that Val kept these memories tucked away because she didn't think Rumble would care, and she kept them buried deep to keep herself safe too. There's so many of these little details all over the place. Shiffin's bear in her room, likely given to her by her lover that died, is the main boss of her dream. Or Hannah's dream, with her favorite story influencing it, places Rumble as the hero because she looks up to him. The characters all throughout Sano Island have details that go beyond the Call of Duty and flesh them out more than many modern games. And I'm not saying it's the deepest story out there, but when I found these details, all these connections to the various story threads in the game, I was impressed. And it all comes together at the very end of the game where Rumble and Tumble's friendship really comes to the forefront. These two are constantly at each other's throats even though they need each other. I've said that before, but little moments throughout the story highlight their give-and-take relationship. Rumble may take more jabs at Tumble, see again the literal punching mechanic, but Tumble gets back at him more than enough times. The line after they complete Shiffin's dream and get her to sing, where Tumble calls him whipped, is one of the funniest lines in the whole game, and it shows how far their friendship goes. A little after the midway point in the game, the Queen of Dreams appears to Tumble and starts acting really strangely. We as the player know that she accidentally opened the door to Kingdom Hearts, so she's acting really sussy. And I understand if you need to unsubscribe after I said that, but what's important is that Tumble doesn't know what's going on. So it makes this whole scene really stressful, watching this good-natured and trusting character be told, comply or die. And Tumble doesn't tell Rumble about this at all, like he's been beaten into submission. And then it dawns on you, in the back of your mind for the rest of the game, Tumble is on a timer. Later, when you're nearing the end of the game, there's a very subtle change that they do point out. But I noticed it before the game. Tumble's neck charm changed colors. That clock is ticking faster and faster, and Tumble's running out of time. He tries to play it off, and Rumble tries to brush it off too, but you know there's something looming. Rumble might be oblivious, but the dramatic irony set up here is palpable. It all comes to a head when the two finally get all the holy instruments and open the center of the temple. The Queen returns, going completely mask off, intending to take over Rumble's body so that the Nightmare can take over all of the holy instruments. But Val saves him, leading us to jump in after the Queen. That brings us to the forest sequence I mentioned before, and a really striking blend between gameplay and narrative direction. Rumble realizes how Val felt about him and becomes determined to save her. While before he likely would have only cared to beat the Queen and get the Dreamstone, now he wants to make sure Val lives. And as we push closer and closer to the Queen's domain, we see Val's dream pushing back against the encroaching nightmare trying to take her over. Am I looking far too deeply into a game from 2002 that definitely didn't need to have this much meaning attached to it? Yes, have you seen any of my other videos? If you answered no, hey, welcome. Please hit that subscribe button. We're almost at 1,000. Ultimately, this all comes together in the final showdown with the Queen and Nightmare. It's the perfect showcase of what the combat system can be when it all works together. Both Rumble and Tumble's specialties are needed here, from Rumble's weapons and tools to Tumble's stomach skills. Again, he's fat and he uses food to give him strength. But it's such a great moment from a gameplay and storytelling perspective where we see Rumble and Tumble on the same wavelength for the first time. They understand now that together there is nothing that either of them can't beat, which makes the final fight even more heartbreaking. After a quick rematch with the nightmare-controlled Queen, the curse placed onto Tumble comes back into play. Directly threatening to turn Tumble into pork roast, he betrays Rumble and steals all of his items. And after all that time slowly whittling down his barriers, only being able to trust himself, it's a moment that pushes Rumble back to his old ways. His expression changes, his heart hardening again as he resolves to finish it out on his own. It's painful seeing the way that Rumble justifies the way he shut everyone else out for the sake of his goals. Through smaller interactions and cutscenes, we find that Rumble feels empty, that there's little to be excited about, and that there's this hole in his heart that he's trying to fill. And he's convinced himself, even to the very end, that finding the Dreamstone would finally give him something. To be the greatest ruin seeker, to find a treasure that people deem to be too impossible to obtain would fix that void. You have to understand, Dual Hearts' whole story is something of a redemption for Rumble, trying to heal his trauma and move on with his life. He's selfish, rude, often stubborn, and even unpleasant. He doesn't understand kindness given towards him. He downplays the good he does for others. But just as much as he's helped the rest of Sano Island, the residents have slowly started to show him what he's been searching for. And I understand that that sounds stupid, the power of friendship and all that, but it's a little deeper than that. Rumble as a character has been convinced for so long that he doesn't need anyone else. He has pushed away everyone else that he's helped, and even the people that have helped him. But through his time on Sano Island, he started to heal, and he starts to understand what is important to him. It makes the scene of fighting the Queen with no weapons even more upsetting because you can do nothing to her. Any attempt to attack her barehanded doesn't even scratch her, and Rumble ends up getting slapped to the ground, proving that he can't rely on anyone else. Even his closest ally on this whole adventure betrayed him. But then Tumble jumps in and defends him. Even though his life is on the line, even though he's scared, he can't leave Rumble to die and let the Nightmare win. With the Holy Instruments back, the pair square off with the Nightmare for one last brawl. We are so fucking back, boys, let's do this. The final boss isn't anything groundbreaking, but I think again it does a good job mixing and matching what tactics you use. Using a different combination of Rumble's weapons and finishing it off by using Tumble's just absolute terrible flying skill, you eventually defeat the Nightmare for good. When he tries to escape, Rumble releases all of the Holy Instruments as they try to give chase and destroy it forever. It's silly. I think they should have just used the weapons in their, like, holy orb form instead. Uh-oh, the primordial darkness is being bludgeoned to death by a mine, and he's being cut into a million pieces by a playing card. Like, I understand what exactly they were going for, and it does work. But I can't help but cackle at the idea of Rumble using the mine as a blunt object instead of an explosive. But you don't get to celebrate. As Rumble approaches the Dreamstone, Tumble falls over, his pendant glowing a dark purple and black. He starts to fade out from existence. With the Nightmare gone, his curse was never lifted. He's being taken with him. He finally reveals the curse to Rumble, and when asked why he even saved Rumble's life, man, like I said, I know the storytelling is stifled thanks to the limits of the speech bubbles and no voice acting, but it still hurts. It's a parallel to Rumble's own life, as Tumble reveals how he's been alone for a long time. But even though Rumble's kicked him around, he relied on Tumble. It's a bit of an abusive relationship, but he saw Rumble as his first and only friend. And it's here where we see the walls around Rumble start to fully crumble. The rhyme wasn't intentional at first, but I thought this part of the script needed a little bit of levity. Please laugh. After a brief heart-to-heart, Tumble disappears and leaves behind the Dreamstone. Rumble picks it up, and then he wakes up in a bed. And at this point, I was bracing myself for them to say that the whole game was a dream. I had never gotten to this point in the game before I played it for the video, so I was so ready to be seething in anger and talking about how this was the worst game ever made. But no, all that happened, and Tumble died. With the Dreamstone still in hand, everything that happened with the nightmare, including Tumble's death, was real. And what the game leaves you with is a somber victory lap for beating the final boss. I really love it when games, after you beat the final boss, allow you to get the reactions of other characters you've gotten to know throughout the whole story. But this one does it to fucking hurt you. You can talk to every NPC that you've met, every single one you've encountered, and they'll have some unique dialogue relating to Tumble or the Temple of Dreams. And it hurts seeing the way that the developers took the time to make these character interactions. So many of them just show how much the loss of Tumble has affected Rumble, with him instinctively trying to respond to some characters asking where he is. Florence asking to paint Tumble again, with the slightest bit of Tumble's ear coming into shot only for him to disappear when Rumble looked at him. Like, it's not the most masterfully done, but damn if it isn't effective. And they do this in a few other spots, like Hannah asking if she could ride on Tumble's back out in the forest. Rumble says yes, and when he turns again, Tumble disappears. And the player feels that pain too. Because of how integral Tumble was to the gameplay, losing him at the very end of the game feels like a blow to the player. You lose your ability to ride around on Tumble, something you've probably started to do instinctively to get around Sano Island faster. Every time I finished a cutscene, I would immediately hit the trigger to try and jump on his back, only to be reminded that I couldn't anymore. It gets to the point where you can have a scene where Rumble sincerely walks up to Santa Claus and considers asking if he can bring Tumble back as a gift. You can go to Toma and have Rumble ask how to cope with the loss of someone you care about. And I think it's in these moments where the true heart and soul of the game come through. The characters, the story, the world building, the whole game building up the relationship between Rumble and Tumble, themes of trauma and healing, it just really gets to me. The game has its emotions on its sleeve, and it's not afraid to show the sincerity in its writing. In the end, Rumble sits on top of the Temple of Dreams with the Dreamstone in hand, realizing he still feels empty. He's achieved his goal. He found one of, if not the rarest treasures in the world, and he feels nothing. Man, if that ain't a whole mood and a half, I don't know what is. Anyways, did you know we're almost at 1,000 subs? Rumble discovers that the Dreamstone will grant whoever possesses it a single wish, but in doing so, it loses any luster and turns just to stone. He's conflicted, losing the treasure he sought for so long if it meant to wish for whatever his heart desires. Dual Hearts, while the actual gameplay tends to fall flat in some angles, has a strong core at the center. The characters and the way that they live and breathe on Sano Island helps the game stand out from many other adventures at that time. Characters that feel believable despite the fantastical story going on around them. A setting that adds to the dreamlike atmosphere, making the world feel like a place that I'd love to be a part of. There are many other aspects that I didn't even cover here for the sake of brevity that just show the love for the writing. Yes, get your jokes in now looking at the time on the video. Is it a revolutionary story that should have changed the paradigms of video games forever? No. Games before and after it would execute their stories in much better ways. But for what is here and the whole package around it, thinking back to all the scenes I remembered while writing the script, there was a warm feeling that I couldn't shake. I grew to enjoy all of these characters and genuinely felt for their issues. It's not a matter of monsters or trying to save a kingdom. It's an artist with imposter syndrome. It's a singer trying to cope with the loss of her lover. It's a young girl wanting her parents to spend more time with her. Dual Hearts is a story about people, realistic people, and what it takes to move on with their lives after it kicks you down. And I don't think that will ever stop resonating for me. Everything it does, everything it attempts to do with its story and its characters hits on a perfect personal level. and I think it's a shame more people haven't experienced it. But much like Rumble, our time on Sano Island has drawn to a close. It's about time to wake up. Let's ease you out of the dream and let you get going. For years, this game existed in a nebulous place in my mind, stuck in half-remembered nostalgia and flashes of gameplay. What I and seemingly many people considered to be a half-baked action RPG simply fell into obscurity, left to linger on the fringes of memory. And I genuinely think that's a shame, having gone through the entire game again with a new sense of clarity. Dual Hearts was the victim of an unfortunate release date in the West, tied eternally to a game that would live in infamy. Even if those comparisons would only ever be superficial, it could never fully escape the shadow of what it was placed under. Kingdom Hearts would dwarf it and rewrite the perception of what kind of game it was even trying to be. A Zelda-like game with an emphasis on platforming and storytelling relegated to being a poor attempt at an action RPG. This game and Nomura's psychological torture only has the ties of heart being in the title somewhere, a spiky-haired anime protagonist, and the vague concept of adventure. I guess you could include the movement in there as well, but that would mean every game with a 3D movement would be a complete copy of Kingdom Hearts in some way. I'm being facetious, but that's what it feels like. So many reviews, both professional and amateur, bring up Kingdom Hearts directly by name, and I felt like I was missing something, because there's so little RPG here that almost marketing it as an action RPG was a mistake. Even Matrix Software's own website says that this game is an action RPG, which, I don't know, it feels like you're putting false expectations onto yourself. Like, I'm not about to go take this video and start marketing it as a movie based off of an obscure PS2 game from 2002. Even so, despite how the game might be remembered, I think what it deserves to be remembered by is the heart and soul inside the world created here. From the art to the writing, the music to the level design, there's a clear vision that the Matrix Software team wanted to bring to the game. And I think it came through perfectly, creating a unique adventure that I can't say I've played anything like. I know the two Alundra games that came before this have similar aspects, but I can't comment on how much was lifted. Seeing people call Dual Hearts a spiritual successor makes me curious, I admit, and wonder if someone at Matrix Software just really wants this story to be told in some way. In my research, I found another game that they made called Avalon Code, with reviews for that saying it was a spiritual successor to Dual Hearts now too. I think it really goes to show that someone really has a story or a dream that they want to show to the world, and it might change over time. Alundra isn't Dual Hearts, and Dual Hearts isn't Avalon Code, but they keep iterating and changing what works and what doesn't so that they can keep trying to tell this story. The game's director Keizo Kato is likely a name you've never heard of. It's one that I hadn't heard until I started research. He's something of a ghost with almost no information about him online aside from the various credits he's gained from being in the game industry from a long time. Though it was largely in managerial positions, he's been working on games since the 1980s. The man has special credits thanks in games like Super Mario World and Paper Mario. He has credits up until 2016 with Twilight Princess HD. To say he's had a hand at least partly in some of the greatest and most well-known games in the world is an understatement. But as far as I have found, and as far as anyone that's tried to reach out to him has found, this is his only directorial game. And that almost feels fitting in a way, that someone's only attempt at directing a game would be so unique and ethereal, just like the person who made it. Dual Hearts is a special game to me, a game that I think only comes around once in a blue moon. It's not a hidden classic exactly, but I think it's a game that deserves far more. I think Keizo Kato and the rest of Matrix Software should be proud of the creation that they've made. It's a game that shows that anyone can dream, that anyone can grow, and that you can change with a little help from the people around you. Dual Hearts is a game about growth. Finally beating it for the first time gave me a new perspective that I hadn't expected, and I think it's what's going to stick with me the most. No matter how dark things get, no matter how scary the nightmares become, they can always change, even if they are just a floating, laughing clown head.